Coming up next on the Maine Challenge, Nikki Sequeira with the Community Water Justice Project, talking about what's happening with water right here in Maine. Hi, and welcome to Maine Challenge. Did you have a glass of water this morning when you woke up? It's amazing how we take certain things for granted that are essential to our survival. I am so excited to have with me this morning Nikki Sequeira. Nikki is the co-founder of Community Water Justice. She is an incredible advocate. She has on those issues for many, many years. She is an amazing human being. She's a great mom. And Nikki, I could not be more happy to say hello to you and thank you for joining us on the Main Challenge this morning. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much. So Nikki's paths and mine, we crossed about water justice and about water is life. And it's so interesting to me that, two-thirds of our earth is water. Most of our bodies are water. And yet I think it's one of the things that we take for granted so easily. And I think you have said, Nikki, and I'm not going to directly quote you because I should, because it was so poetic and profound. But, here we are the water is facing challenges from every direction, from climate change and drought, from pollution and plastics, from taking the rights away from our indigenous brothers and sisters. It's just on every level, it's a crisis. And I think you said it's the most invisible but acute climate crisis that we have and in this planet. So if you would just start sharing with us a little bit about what your passion is, why you got interested in this issue, and then what's happening. I neglected to say Nikki is from Freiburg, right in the heart of where Poland Spring is extracting water from Mainers, and we'll get to that. But let's start first with why water is your passion and what you see as the threat.
Yes. Well, I moved to Freiburg. I mean, I'm a lifelong Maine resident. I was born here and chose to live here because I love it. And what's tied to everything in Maine, it all comes back to water. For me, is the way I see things. I see its connectivity and its significance to our rural character and also our economic base. How I got interested specifically in the Freiburg issue with Nestle, living here on a very busy road and seeing trucks go by my home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with at the time a very young boy who was very energetic and was attracted to the road. And that was a big, danger, especially with those trucks that are filled with, 8,500 gallons of water. They're not going to stop very quickly. So it was about in 2010 where I started to engage with community members about their history here and presence, which, led me to talk to legislators from back in the 70s to, different town officials over the period of years. And so my son and I, we watched a documentary, and I ended up having to pause it many times because he was so inquisitive, because he was seeing our community being represented and he had questions. So I took the time and explained. And so that kind of inspired us to do something and get engaged on the issue because he was visibly upset. And so, I encourage, learning is such a wonderful thing, and letting our, inquiry process lead us through education. That's so important to foster a love of learning. And that's what we did. And that's what we're doing today still. I'm still learning. People are starting to call me an expert or an advisor, but geez, I am so hyper aware of what I still have yet to know, especially when it comes to water laws and how confusing things get. When we're comparing Maine to other states, looking at California, I mean, they're a mess as far as water laws. And I hope that, by doing something preemptively here in Maine, we can wind up not like California right now.
Yeah, well, I always think about what the indigenous people always tell us, which is water is life. And I think about that. And but I think with the Nestle issue, so that's been a nexus of some action and some in action, if you will. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who would say Nestle has been great for Maine. Provided lots of jobs. They give money to the local libraries. They're doing. It's been great for Maine. And I know that there is obviously another side of that story. So can you talk a little bit about what you see? One thing you said is just the 8,500-gallon trucks that go all the time. And isn't it correct that Maine people don't get paid a penny for this natural resource that they're draining, literally?
Right. I mean, there's so many negative externalities when it comes to bottled water. Of course, it's so hard to see through their PR campaigns because they spend so much money and we're inundated with advertisements and their narrative, feeding us the story, how wonderful that they are. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, looking deeper, there's a lot of questions. I mean, like I said, the trucks, they're very heavy. One full truck has the equivalent impact of 9,600 cars on our
Wow.
roads. And so, where does the money for road repair come from, right? Are we
Us?
socializing the cost for Nestle to do
Mm-hmm.
business here?
Mm-hmm.
In towns like Denmark, Maine, they pay nothing for the water that they take, absolutely nothing. Now in Freiburg, they pay 1/10 of 1 cent per gallon, but that's also on a prorated scale. So the more they pump, the less they pay. And your average, resident doesn't get that benefit. Um, yeah, so the inequity is pretty significant. And, the case with Freiburg, it's unique that we have a private water company.
Mm-hmm.
It's not run by the municipality. And
Mm-hmm.
so, there's a few people that stand to benefit from this transaction, but the community sees relatively little in return.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, rural Maine, we're all strapped for money. We make do, we get by. I mean, how long have we gotten by without them prior to now? All of a sudden, it's just like, oh, this is great. I'll give $1,000 scholarship here and I'll give a 500 donation there. But what that does is buy silence more than
Wow.
anything, because, $500 donation to some organizations, that can be a good chunk of money depending on what your overall budget is and what your goals are as an organization. They strategically give to libraries often, and definitely there's a pattern with local fire stations. They're
Uh,
always in with the local fire guys because they also.
when they run out of water, we're in trouble.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting because, the Freiburg Fair, they experienced a fire in recent history where one
Mhm.
of their buildings burned down.
Oh, wow.
And when they went to pump water there to put out the fire, they didn't have enough pressure. So, it's interesting. So when Nestle showed up with a truck, they diverted a truck to bring it over there. They get to be the heroes. But I haven't heard the answer to why the pressure wasn't
So, yeah.
where it should have been.
Well, and that's one of the things that I keep thinking about, and we are blessed in the Northeast with what we think right up now as of an abundant water supply.
Mhm.
And then we turn our sights over to California and to Arizona and places where where drought, just regular drought, but then drought as exacerbated by climate change makes us realize, I think, that water is going to be the new oil. It's going to be the new fossil fuel, I think, globally. Like access to clean water to, just enough water to power and do all the things that we need. And do you think that in your activism work, do you feel like people have that sense, or do they just think like, oh, this is just going to be here forever? We don't have a problem here.
Well, it would be good if more people had that idea. In Maine, it's challenging because we're considerably our water. I hate to use the word wealth often just because we attribute the idea of wealth to money often, but
Yeah.
our natural wealth, if, for lack of just a better word right at the moment that would express a similarity. It's really interesting. I do hear people making that relationship idea, but then again, what is oil to water? I mean, we can survive forever without oil, right?
Absolutely.
Humans have existed for a long time on this planet without access to oil. However, water, you might have, 5 days, they say.
Hmm.
So it's a different game. And I think, if some people are worried about what's World War III going to be about? Is it about water? And that's, I
Right.
think protecting our water and keeping it out of private hands could definitely be thought of as a war prevention measure, right?
Right.
Because we know how it played out with oil.
Yes.
And
Right.
corporations, privatizing oil and its profits, and all of a sudden we're fighting each other over that resource. And it's going to be the same if we privatize water,
Well, and so
guaranteed.
let's talk about that, Nikki, because I know that that's something you're working on right now. That obviously Nestle, I mean, it's a Swiss company, a foreign-owned company. Let's everybody remember that, a foreign-owned company that owns Poland Spring, that's taking water from multiple aquifers in Maine, mostly paying almost nothing for it or nothing. And we as citizens are getting nothing. It's not like in Alaska where when the oil is taken, every citizen gets money for the resource that they're taking, right? So we
Right.
don't have any of that. And now there's an attempt to sell Nestle, and we see it out in the West all the time, to sell water rights and water companies to basically Wall Street investors who
Yeah.
have, it seems like, even less of an interest in local communities and to actually make it a commodity that then investors decide who should get access to the water and how the water should be used. And so talk a little bit about what's happening. I know it's happening already out west. Is this move by Nestle a move in that direction here?
Well, that's definitely the fear, and that's how things seem to be positioning themselves.
Yeah, tell us
Um,
about it.
on December 7th, 2020 was the first day where water futures were traded on the stock market.
Oh,
And
wow.
that is really unsettling because we all knew this was coming, but it's here. It's here. And we need to start preparing for this, what might seem like an inevitability, but it doesn't need to be.
Mhm.
So Nestle, yes, they just sold their Nestle Water North America brands to One Rock Capital Partners and this billionaire, Metropolis is his last name. So they are engaging in what's to be a $4+ billion deal, which they could come to an agreement by, this spring sometime. We just don't know when, but
Yeah.
sometime soon. And yeah, I mean, as far as this group of, hedge funders and corporations, their number one priority is to increase profits for their shareholders,
Right.
just like Nestle.
Right.
But they don't have a giant PR arm to them and community relations. Nestle does. So they are interested, at least in the perception of
Yeah.
who they are, and will, toss pennies to the poor, so to speak, through little donations here and there to
Right.
make the peasants happy. But One Rock, I mean, this will be interesting to see how that plays out. And from, one person I talked to who's a banker on Wall Street, knows One Rock Capital, and and he called them kind of mid-level hacks was his term. So, I mean, of course, that was said in confidence, but if it
Yeah.
gives you an idea of, who they are in that world,
Hmm.
it's hard to expect them to be a quote unquote good neighbor.
Yeah.
Nestle touts themselves as being a good neighbor, but there are plenty of challenges out there, even to that idea.
Right.
But I think it's what we can expect. Nothing glowing for our communities,
Yeah.
especially where they're locking up our water sources. Where does that leave room for communities like Freiburg to grow economic wise if they have identified and are taking our sustainable yield of our aquifer?
Right.
So we're
And
stunting our growth.
yeah. Well, so I want to go back to something you said about water being traded as a commodity on Wall Street.
Hmm.
And as recent, I mean, and it just started this past December.
Yeah.
And so that, like, to me, that like makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up about like, this is like water being a commodity that's going to be, as you said, withheld and bought and sold and diverted, and I know out west there's a huge controversy about whether the water that's now owned by these private companies is going to be diverted to the cities or to the power companies or to the ski resorts or to the farmers. And the people deciding it are the people, as you said, are their only job is to make money for their investors. I mean, so they're not going to go where the water's needed. They're going to go where the water is going to be the most profitable.
That's
And
right.
can you talk a little bit about, I mean, it sort of boggles your mind that this resource that we absolutely depend on for our life, it's not like fossil fuels or even corn or, other commodities that are traded. I mean, we can figure out how to get around it. We can't get around it with water.
Right. And there's a sad adage, which I'm believing is true, being up in Augusta at the State House and seeing how things unfold there with Nestle's lawyers and lobbyists in the State House, water flows towards money. And that's going to marginalize populations quite
Huge.
easily. And I'm thinking of, people who are financially struggling in rural Maine. I'm thinking about my friends in Flint, Michigan that still do not have clean water after more than 6 years. Like, that's the future we're looking at if we can't figure this out and start respecting water for what it is and the role it plays in our lives. And, we don't need to go on that path. We have a choice.
Yeah.
But we need to get together now. We need to figure this out. Nestle, One Rock Capital, and the billionaires across the world that are securing water sources globally right now. That's their water cooler talk, is what aquifers do you own, or access to. But we need to change that conversation quite quickly. And we have a moment now to do that. It's just, are we going to, come up with 100-year plan for Maine, since Nestle and One Rock has a 100-year plan for Maine, and we are asleep at the wheel.
Wow. Wow. And it's so interesting to me. So so serendipitous or something that here we are looking at least trying to make access to electricity and power a public good, right?
Right.
And the exact opposite is happening. And again, with something that is even more necessary to us for our lives and livelihoods than power, which is water.
Right.
Wow. Okay, so I know that there have been efforts in the legislature in Maine to either tax the water being withdrawn or something that's going to help Maine have a 100-year plan as we look at this, and or at least like the utilities have the Public Utility Commission, which at least allegedly is like supposed to be regulating this, what's going on. Is there any, first of all, is there any sort of that kind of regulation as they privatize water? And what do you think? I know you said the lobbyists and stuff get in the way, but is there a way for what is the thing that we can get to people's hearts to change their minds?
Right. I mean, I do it mostly through one-on-one conversations, and I love the work that I have been doing with Wabanaki peoples who are
Hmm.
very passionate and so connected still inherently on a very deep cultural level to water. And it's healthy for me to be around that, because also feeling that connection and being so steeped in this work, that it does keep me centered. And I would encourage people to start, watching some of the documentaries, for example, that Sunlight Media Collective puts out.
Okay.
It's not all about Nestle, of course, but it's about, how do we reconnect with this life source that we so disconnected ourselves from. Indoor plumbing was an incredible innovation, a wonderful thing, but it also disconnected us from our actual water sources. So, it's already at a distance. We invisibilize it in that way. In Maine, when you think of water, in the State House, water is just a utility, right? And it's hard, talking on those disconnected terms all the time, because it's more than just a utility, right? But when we treat it as a utility, it's also to disrespect it.
Yes.
And
Right.
granted, when we think of utility, it's more about the pumps and the pipes, the delivery
Yeah, the delivery
system,
system.
but
Gotcha.
water gets caught up in that. And so it's
Wow.
there's many things we can do at the state level, but it's interesting, the idea of like, do we put Maine's water under a public trust? That's been attempted several times over the years and failed miserably, I think for two reasons. One of them, the corporate block at the state level is getting bigger and stronger because outside corporations want our water. And so they can just buy a piece of land and take what they need, even though it may not be a beneficial use to everybody. You know, for example, like Nestle, they would be considered an extraordinary use because they're mining a lot of water and they're removing it from our hydrological cycle. But we
Right.
don't respect in Maine the difference between beneficial and extraordinary uses in
Mhm.
ways that we should at all. So, you know, our antiquated laws that we have on the books that were put there in the 1800s still exist. We're one of only 3 states that still has this absolute capture law on the book, whereas if you own the land, then you own the mining rights. But water doesn't stay still, you know,
Right.
it flows.
Doesn't
We
know
all
those
depend
borders.
on it. It's our
Right.
commons, and we need
Mhm.
to treat that differently. You know, I love that we're a home rule state. And I love that, you know, and bless the independent spirit of the Mainer, but we really need to be smarter on this. And how can we collectively protect this for ourselves, our families, our future generations, and our entire environment? Because
Mhm.
our economy is entirely based on our natural environment. And we really need to take better care of that, because how I see things positioning right now, there's no care involved in our ecosystem on the
Mm.
trajectory that we're proposing and setting ourselves on.
And so in the long term, especially if you look long term for,
Yeah,
as you said,
we don't do
not,
that. We look at how can I make a buck today? But we need to be looking 100 years ahead.
right.
Nestle is, and they're into year 35 right now into their 100-year plan, and they're
Wow.
doing great. We, on the other hand, are no,
Yeah.
we're losing it. We're losing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, because they have a, I mean, their plan, they only have to be sustainable enough to continue to make their profits. We have to be
Right.
be sustainable enough to, take care of our people as well as our industries and that kind of stuff. So,
Right. And to be fair, you and I, we probably won't be walking this earth by the time we see the troubles that we know that are coming. And so it's easy, you know, how does accountability happen
right. Exactly.
to
It's,
our
yeah. And,
future generations? You know, we can't do this to them.
right. Yeah. We have to pay attention, right?
Yeah,
7 generations ahead, I think is what our Wabanaki friends tell us. We have to think
exactly.
7
It's a great
generations ahead.
model and way of thinking, because if we're not thinking on those terms, we're rather selfish.
Yeah, no, very selfish. And and going back to the very basics to where we didn't even start, but it's just like the idea that all of a sudden we should bottle water and sell it, like instead of turning on the tap or going to the well or going to the river, it's just such a, I mean, somebody was brilliant thinking about, hey, here's a great way we can make a ton of money. But
Yeah.
man, and now what that does to plastics and what that then does to the
Oh, yeah.
water, the cycle
Yep.
of destruction is pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, it's we got a situation on our hands, that's for sure. I mean, the first time bottled water was sold, I think people laughed, right?
Yeah,
You know, the Poland Spring Company was came about in of 1859, I believe. So Poland Spring as a company has been here a long time. Of course, Nestle hides behind that history and saying, we've been here since 1859. We're your friends. We're a good Maine business. But they didn't build that business. They bought it in 1992.
yeah, right,
And, you know, they've been peddling water and selling it as a solution to water problems. And
right.
that's where we see this collision course kind of unfolding in front of us, where industry is not held accountable for polluting people's water sources. And then we create this dependence on bottled water because we lose the impetus to really hold accountability, because so long as we have this access that's coming in 16-ounce bottles, I mean,
Right,
you know,
right.
people need to put up and push a little harder, you know, to secure their local water sources, because that's the model of sustainability that we need to achieve here
Yeah,
in Maine, all over the US and globally. Granted, there's some places that are going to be more of a challenge that, you know, experience extended drought. We need to be a little creative, and that's true.
hmm
And to a degree, I think it's fair to say that sharing some of our water sources with places that are in acute emergencies, I, nobody's saying that we take that away,
yeah,
because we need to figure out a resource sharing system of mutual aid. You know, not that there can't be some sort of
success
exchange,
to
but
that,
we
right.
really, I think, because we do have copious amounts of water, you know, that could be our responsibility to the larger community until they can take care of their problem. Not like Flint, where we're going to kick the can down the road and turn our backs on whole entire communities,
Right.
but we need to solve these problems. And I was also working on the Water Act at the federal level,
Uh-huh.
and trying to divert funding from the federal government to divert to water systems, municipal water systems, because that's one problem where, is to the benefit of water privatizers and corporations like Nestle, is because, bottled water sales is rocketing when our infrastructure is so old
Right.
and failing, and people are paying for water they can't even drink. And so if we can't help these municipal water systems do proper maintenance and make sure that they're able to deliver clean water, then we're already going to be facing a national security issue as it relates to the availability of clean water.
Wow. It's
So
a security issue, it's an
mhm,
agriculture issue, it's a
mhm,
life issue. And
it is.
unbelievably, we are running out of time here, Nikki, but we could go on for a long time. And I'm so grateful for all of your expertise and your activism. So if there's, and I know you talked about this a little bit about having one-on-one conversations, but if someone wants to get involved, if someone says, "Oh my God, I didn't know any of this, what can I do?" What's the advice we can give them? What can we ask them to do?
Right. If you have access to clean water, do not drink bottled water. That's really easy. Think ahead. I mean, how did we do it for, thousands and thousands of years? We carried water containers, right? So
Turn
let's
on the tap.
let's just go back, the culture of convenience, leave it behind, grab your bottled water, grab your bottle of water, your
Water.
refillable one, yes. And then
Mhm.
also, you can follow Community Water Justice. We have a Facebook presence. There's a website. We're on Instagram. Educate yourself. We're always posting educational things, so you can get engaged. Also, if adopt a local water ordinance, it's going to protect your local sources. That's one thing you can do as a community. It's a wonderful way to get together as a community and plan out what can we do for the next 100 years for our next generations that's going to be meaningful and protect our environment. So that's
Awesome.
my advice for right now.
All right, that's great advice. And I really go to Community Water Justice. Their educational materials are fantastic. There's calls to action. They're having a national seminar, or they will have had it by the time you see this, with people
Right.
around the country working on this issue because water is life. Thank you, Nikki, for dedicating your life to so much of your life to this and for being with us today. We look forward to having you back as we learn more and more and as things progress and hopefully in a better direction. So thank you. Have a wonderful day and thanks for being with us.
Thank you
And
so
thank
much,
you.
Betsy. I love that you're having this show. It's wonderful.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all for watching the Maine Challenge.
The views and opinions expressed on Maine Challenge are solely those of the program participants and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions of Lincoln County Television, its employees, or the producers of this program. Maine Challenge is a production of Lincoln County Indivisible.